The village lay along the curve of a great river, a place where the water flowed like a living spirit and the people walked with the weight of old beliefs resting on their shoulders. The huts were spread out among towering palm trees, their roofs made of dried reeds that rustled softly whenever the wind carried whispers from the river. Every dawn arrived with the smell of wet soil, wood smoke and distant drumming, reminding everyone that life here was tangled with traditions older than memory. Children grew up hearing stories about the river's moods, how it protected the pure-hearted and punished those who carried darkness in their souls. Elders bowed their heads when passing the riverbank, offering small drops of palm wine or crushed herbs as gifts, believing the river kept watch over the village more than any chief or council ever could. Among the villagers lived a young woman whose presence seemed to brighten even the dullest mornings. She moved quietly, always attentive, her heart full of gentleness that many admired but few understood deeply. Her skin held the warm glow of the sun, and her eyes carried a softness that made elders call her a blessing of the water. She was loved by the old men who leaned on carved wooden canes, loved by the grandmothers who sat weaving mats in the shade, and loved by the little children who ran to her with scraped knees and muddy hands. But inside her own home, love was a rare thing. Her stepmother, sharp-tongued and cold-hearted, saw her not as a blessing but as a burden she had been forced to tolerate. Whenever the girl bent to sweep the compound or wash cooking pots, her stepmother hovered behind her with insults ready on her lips, whispering that the girl was useless, unwanted, and responsible for every small misfortune. Even when the girl worked tirelessly, grinding grains until her fingers ached or fetching heavy pots of water from the river, the stepmother found ways to belittle her, mocking her efforts or accusing her of being slow and lazy. Still, the girl continued her tasks with quiet endurance. She rose at sunrise to grind millet for breakfast, her rhythmic motions blending with the morning birds. She swept the compound until the dust settled neatly in the corners. She visited elders who needed help with carrying firewood or tending their gardens, always offering her time with a smile. And nearly every afternoon she walked down to the river with baskets of laundry balanced on her hip. She knelt on the smooth stones by the water's edge, letting the cool waves lap over her hands as she scrubbed clothes clean. Each time she gazed across the shimmering surface, she felt something watching her, not in a fearful way but in a protective one. The villagers often said the river had a soul, a deep consciousness that recognized truth and innocence. She never told anyone, but sometimes she felt the river understood her more than humans ever had. Though she couldn't explain it, a quiet tension stirred around her, something like the calm before a storm. Her stepmother's bitterness grew sharper with each passing day, and the river seemed to glow brighter whenever she approached it, as if both forces, the cruelty at home and the spirit of the water, were slowly drifting toward each other, preparing for a fate that neither the girl nor the village could yet imagine. The stepmother's hatred had not begun suddenly, it had grown slowly, fed by envy and fear, like a vine tightening around her heart. From the moment she married the girl's father, she realized she would always live in the shadow of the daughter he adored. The girl's kindness irritated her, her beauty offended her, and her quiet grace reminded her daily of what she herself could never be. Villagers often complimented the girl, not realizing their harmless words cut into the stepmother like a blade. When elders praised the girl's helpful nature, the stepmother's jaw tightened. When young men smiled at the girl's gentle ways, the stepmother's eyes darkened. But what she hated most was the memory of the girl's father lifting his daughter into his arms, calling her, "my little river light." That affection lodged in the stepmother's heart like a thorn that refused to be pulled free. The father's constant traveling only worsened things. He left the village every few moons to trade goods with distant communities, selling her woven baskets and carved masks along the river routes. Each time he left, he kissed his daughter's forehead and promised to return with gifts. For the stepmother, his departures were opportunities, moments when there was no one to shield the girl from her bitterness. In his absence, the stepmother grew bold, treating the girl as nothing more than a servant and making her work until her back ached. But even then, the girl never complained, and that quiet strength only deepened the stepmother's resentment. Soon the stepmother realized that if she wanted to turn the village against the girl, she would need to weaponize the one thing the people feared most, their own superstitions. She began whispering small lies to neighbors, nothing too bold at first, just subtle seeds meant to sprout into suspicion. "Ever since that girl came from the river yesterday, my pot cracked," she told one woman. "Maybe she carries strange energy." To another, she murmured, "Have you noticed how animals avoid her?" In truth, dogs adored the girl and followed her often, but after the stepmother's words spread, people began to see ordinary things through a twisted lens. A few days later, she told a group of women at the market that her chickens stopped laying eggs because the girl stepped near their coop. The women gasped, and a flicker of doubt spread through them like smoke. Before long, whispers followed the girl whenever she walked through the village. Older women clutched their beaded necklaces tighter, muttering that she was unlucky. Children who once played near her began avoiding her path, glancing over their shoulders as if afraid of invisible spirits. Even men who had once admired her beauty now watched her from a distance, uncomfortable with the rumors blooming like weeds around her name. Though no one confronted her directly, the silence she faced from once friendly neighbors cut deeper than any insult. She could feel the shift, the village growing colder, withdrawing from her piece by piece. Meanwhile, the stepmother moved through the village like a snake in tall grass, pretending to be concerned, pretending to be protective. If anyone expressed doubt about the rumors, she widened her eyes and sighed heavily, acting like a woman forced to carry a dangerous secret. Her father's blood protects her, she whispered, but when he leaves, things happen. The villagers, already steeped in belief that spirits punished the careless, began to view the girl through a fog of fear. And behind all these quiet manipulations, the stepmother's true plan sharpened in her mind. Something far more sinister than gossip, something that would remove the girl completely. She watched the river often, eyes narrowed as though measuring the depth of its currents. The villagers believed the river protected the innocent, but the stepmother didn't care. She only cared that the river was powerful, unpredictable, and capable of taking without returning. In the shadows of her hut, late at night, she murmured to herself, imagining the day the girl would no longer stand in her way. The lies were only the beginning. Something darker was coming, something that would change the village forever. The stepmother's plan did not unfold all at once. It crept through the village like a silent fog, shaping itself through small incidents she engineered with careful precision. She began by hiding bits of food, dried fish, cassava, and groundnuts, and pretending to discover them missing at just the right moment. She would let out loud, dramatic cries so neighbors could hear, insisting the girl had stolen them. The girl, confused and hurt, denied it, but her soft voice was drowned out by the stepmother's sharp accusations. When calabashes mysteriously cracked in the night or clay pots shattered in the yard, the stepmother clutched her chest theatrically and wailed, "She did this! She brings destruction wherever she goes." The villagers, who had already been poisoned by earlier rumors, began nodding with uneasy agreement. Even when the stepmother misplaced her own beaded jewelry and later found it tucked behind her own sleeping mat, she held it up triumphantly, accusing the girl of trying to curse her belongings. The pattern was clear to the stepmother, though hidden from everyone else. Each staged incident tightened the village's fear, and each fear-filled whisper added another weight against the innocent girl. The elders, once fond of the girl, now watched her with troubled eyes. They saw only the smoke but never the fire behind it, blind to the stepmother's role in creating the chaos. The girl, sensing the shift but not understanding the cause, kept her head low as she completed her chores, hoping the storm would pass. But the storm was only growing. The turning point came when a village child fell inexplicably ill. The boy, usually energetic, suddenly developed a fever that left him trembling. Panic spread quickly. The villagers were always ready to believe sickness came from spiritual imbalance. The stepmother seized the moment with cruel brilliance. She marched into the crowd with the sick child's mother, loudly proclaiming that the girl had walked past the child earlier that evening, casting her shadow over him. She described it as though the simple act of passing by carried dark magic. Her voice quivered with false sorrow as she declared, "This girl's presence has brought nothing but misfortune. How long will we ignore the signs?" The villagers' fear erupted, and soon a council meeting was called. The elders sat in a circle beneath the old Irako tree, their wrinkled faces lit by flickering torchlight. The villagers gathered behind them in anxious clusters, whispering among themselves as if the night wind carried curses. The girl stood at the center, trembling but silent, her eyes searching for even one friendly face. She found none. One elder spoke about the broken pots. Another mentioned the livestock behaving strangely. A woman shouted about her child's nightmares, insisting they began when the girl fetched water from the river at the same time as her. Piece by piece, the rumors merged into one suffocating accusation: the girl was a source of bad luck. The stepmother stepped forward when the murmurs reached their peak. She placed a hand dramatically over her heart, pretending reluctance. "I do not wish to speak against her," she began, gathering sympathy with her false humility. "But the spirits have made their displeasure clear. And if the village does not act, we all may suffer." The crowd shifted uneasily and fear thickened the air. She pointed at the girl, her voice rising like a blade cutting through the night. "We must let the river decide her fate. If she is innocent, the spirits will spare her. If not," she let the words crumble into heavy silence, allowing imagination to do the rest. The elders exchanged troubled looks, but fear had already taken root too deeply. No one dared oppose the stepmother, not when so many strange incidents seemed to support her claims. One by one they nodded in agreement. The decision passed like a death sentence carried on quiet breaths. "Send her to the river," the chief elder declared, voice heavy. "Let the spirits judge her." The villagers exhaled collectively, some relieved, others uneasy, but none brave enough to speak the truth the girl herself barely understood. As torches flickered in the night air, her stepmother stepped back into the shadows, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. The plan she had nurtured had taken full shape, a plan that would cast the girl into the river under the cover of darkness, believing the water would swallow her forever. But the river had its own intentions, and destiny was only beginning to stir. The night felt colder than any night she had ever known, as if the wind itself had been warned of what was about to happen. It hissed through the village like a whispered curse, carrying with it the rattling voices of crickets hidden beneath dry leaves. The moon hung low above the river, wide and pale, casting a trembling silver path across the water. It looked almost like an unsteady invitation, one she wished she had the power to refuse. But her fate had already been chosen for her, not by the spirits she was accused of attracting, but by the woman gripping her wrist hard enough to bruise. Her stepmother's fingers dug into her skin as she dragged her across the dusty ground, her face twisted not with fear but with triumph. She kept muttering under her breath, words meant to sound holy but poisoned with lies. "Evil follows you," she said as though she were speaking to a monster instead of a girl who had never harmed anyone. "You bring shadows into this home. You call things that should never be called." With each accusation the girl pulled back weakly, not in defiance but in disbelief. She knew she was innocent. Everyone knew she was innocent. But the truth did not matter when a woman like her stepmother had already spun her story tightly around the village like a net. A few villagers stepped out of their huts as the pair passed. The soft glow of firelight flickered against their uncertain faces, revealing the guilt some tried so hard to hide. They whispered to each other without moving their lips, their eyes following the girl like mournful lanterns. Some clutched their children tightly. Some lowered their heads as if pretending not to see would free them from responsibility. One old woman reached out a trembling hand as if to stop this silent procession, but fear snatched it back before courage could form a single word. No one wanted to stand against the stepmother. No one wanted to be the next to face her venom. When they reached the river, the wind died, and the world fell strangely quiet, as if even the night wanted to witness what would happen. The stepmother shoved her toward an old wooden canoe resting crookedly at the edge of the water. The girl stumbled, her knees hitting the damp earth, her breath breaking as she looked up at the woman who had once promised to care for her like her own. But that promise had drowned long ago, now it was only cruelty that lived in her eyes. "You will not come back," the stepmother hissed. "The river spirits will deal with you. They take what the village should never keep." With one harsh push she forced the girl into the canoe. The wood was cold beneath her, rough and splintered, biting into her palms as she tried to steady herself. She opened her mouth once, twice, her voice shaking as she called out for help. Her cries were thin, swallowed by the river before they could reach the ears of those who stood nearby pretending not to hear. For a brief moment she thought she saw someone step forward, but they stopped themselves, retreating into their own fear. The stepmother shoved the canoe away from the bank with a deliberate finality, her hands pushing the small boat into the current. The water accepted it without hesitation, pulling it deeper into darkness as though it had been waiting. The girl reached out instinctively, her fingers stretching toward the fading outline of land, but the river moved faster than her hope. The current tightened around the canoe like an unseen hand, dragging her away from everything she had ever known. The moon's reflection shattered into pieces on the rippling surface, breaking apart just as her voice broke, calling her father's name, calling for anyone, to save her. But no one did. Behind her, the villagers slowly drifted back into their homes, comforting themselves with the lie that the river would take her quickly. They convinced themselves that she would drown or vanish into the hands of unseen spirits long before dawn. None of them imagined that the river had its own intentions. None of them imagined it would carry her back. And none of them imagined what she would become when she returned. The river did not take her the way the villagers believed it would. They expected its waters to swallow her, expected its depths to close above her head like a mouth pleased with sacrifice. But the moment the canoe drifted beyond the last flicker of the village fires, something changed. The current, which had pulled so violently at first, softened around her as though a great hand had loosened its grip. The water that had seemed eager to drag her under now cradled the canoe, rocking it gently, almost tenderly. It felt less like a river carrying a doomed girl and more like a mother guiding her child through the dark. The air around her thickened with a strange glow. It did not come from the moon, which hid behind drifting clouds. It came from the water itself. The surface shimmered as if lit from beneath, threads of blue and silver weaving across it like living veins of light. The canoe glided forward without sound, without struggle, as if the river had decided she did not belong to death. Soft whispers rose with the mist, curling around her ears. At first she thought they were wind, but wind did not speak in words she almost understood. Wind did not call her name. These whispers came from the currents shifting beneath her, voices layered over one another, gentle, ancient, mournful, protective. They sang and murmured like spirits who had been waiting for the right moment to speak. She felt no fear. Somehow, in that moment suspended between danger and mystery, fear seemed too small to exist. The light in the water thickened into shapes, silhouettes moving gracefully beneath the surface. Their outlines rippled like smoke yet held the softness of human forms. She leaned over the edge of the canoe, drawn by a warmth she could not explain. As she looked deeper, the glowing shapes rose until one face became clear. Her breath caught. Her mother's features emerged from the water, hair flowing like liquid night, eyes bright with a tenderness she had prayed to see for years. Tears filled the girl's eyes and she reached out, fingers skimming the luminous surface. The water warmed beneath her touch. Her mother's voice came through the currents, resonating both inside her mind and around her like a drifting song. "My child," the voice whispered, gentle as a hand on her cheek. "You were never meant to drown. The river rejects the wicked. It remembers everything done in the shadows." The words struck her like the first breath after nearly drowning. The river remembers. It sees. It judges. And it has not judged her as her stepmother had. A deep ache rose in her chest, all the buried hurt from years of being blamed, belittled, pushed aside. Her mother's presence felt like a balm to wounds she had carried alone. "Do not fear what happens next," the voice continued. "You carry blood that the river knows. It will protect you, guide you, change you. You must rise again, not as the girl they cast away, but as what you were always meant to become." The vision rippled and faded back into liquid light, but the warmth remained. The canoe slowed as if reaching a destination it had known long before she did. A hidden riverbank appeared between tall reeds and smooth stones, a place untouched by villagers, protected by something older than any human settlement. The glowing water pushed the canoe toward it, lifting her gently once more before allowing it to touch land. She felt hands, not human hands but currents shaped like them, helping her step out. When her feet touched the damp soil, she collapsed to her knees. She felt dizzy, breathless, overwhelmed. But then she noticed her skin. Strange marks shimmered faintly across her arms, curling patterns like ancient writing. They were symbols she had never seen before, yet something inside her recognized them. They pulsed softly like a heartbeat beneath her skin. Blessing. Power. Protection. She did not know how she knew, but she understood the meaning of the marks as clearly as if someone had whispered them into her ear. Drawn by a force she couldn't resist, she cupped her hands and dipped them into the glowing water. The river rose to meet her palms as if greeting her. When she lifted the water to her lips and drank, everything inside her shifted. It started as warmth in her chest, then spread through her limbs like fire fed with air. Her muscles tightened with sudden strength, her vision sharpened until she could see every ripple in the river and every movement in the shadows of the reeds. Her heartbeat slowed, then steadied, powerful and calm. She felt rooted to the earth and yet connected to the water at the same time, as if both elements recognized her as theirs. The river had not only saved her. It had claimed her. It had transformed her. And she understood with a clarity the moment she closed her eyes on the hidden riverbank, sleep did not come to her in the way it usually did. There was no drifting, no gentle descent into dreams. Instead, the world around her dissolved like sand washed clean by a wave. Her breath softened, and then she felt herself sinking, slowly, weightlessly, into a place that was not sleep, not waking, and not entirely real. The river opened beneath her like a doorway. She felt no water on her skin, yet she was moving downward, deeper and deeper, as if carried through layers of shimmering blue. Light swirled around her in ribbons, forming tunnels of flowing colors, emerald, sapphire, gold, each shade pulsing like a heartbeat. She reached out, but her hands passed through the light as though through a dream. When her feet touched something solid, she realized she was standing on the riverbed. But this was no ordinary underwater world. The water around her was clear as crystal, allowing her to breathe as freely as air. Strange fish glowed far above, swimming like falling stars, and the stones beneath her feet hummed softly, sending tiny vibrations through her bones. A soft ringing sound echoed. Not a bell. Not a voice. Something between both. Then they appeared. The water spirits emerged from the shimmering currents like figures stepping through woven curtains of light. Their bodies were tall and fluid, shifting between human shapes and flowing streams. Their eyes were bright and ancient, swirling with memories older than any village. Some had long hair made of cascading water, some had skin like river stones, and some flickered like reflections on rippling surfaces. Beautiful. Terrifying. Eternal. She froze not in fear but in awe. Every instinct inside her whispered that she should bow. These were beings the elders only spoke of in hushed tones, guardians, judges, mourners, watchers of time. One spirit stepped forward, its form delicate yet powerful, like a queen carved from flowing currents. Its voice resonated from everywhere at once, filling her chest with a trembling she could not hide. Child of water, the spirit said, you have been wronged. The currents behind them churned, revealing visions like moving paintings suspended in the water. She saw the village, the stepmother's face twisted in envy, the quiet lies spread through the market, the way villagers avoided her. Then darker scenes appeared, rituals performed at night, herbs burning in clay bowls, charms tied with red thread, and her stepmother whispering curses into the river. The girl gasped. Her knees weakened as the truth settled around her like cold mist. She wanted me gone, she whispered. She used magic? A second spirit, its voice deep like thunder underwater, answered, dark magic. Borrowed power. She sought to erase you from the path fate laid for you. The visions shifted again, showing her stepmother kneeling before a hidden shrine, holding strands of the girl's hair, her voice trembling with desperation. The images revealed everything. The stepmother's fear that beauty and kindness would one day place the girl above her, her belief that removing her would secure control over the household, and her willingness to call upon forbidden forces to make it happen. Tears rose but did not fall. The water around her absorbed them instantly. Another spirit approached, its form more serene than the others. But the river knows truth, it said. It knows hearts. It knows lies. And it has chosen you. The current stilled. The entire realm seemed to hold its breath. Chosen me for what? She asked softly. All the spirits lifted their hands, or what resembled hands. Light flowed toward her, wrapping around her like threads of silk. It seeped through her skin, warm and electric, filling her veins with something alive and ancient. You will carry our balance, the queen-like spirit said. Our voice. Our justice. A surge coursed through her body, gentle at first, then rising in waves until she felt she might burst from the intensity. Her arms tingled, the symbols on her skin glowing more brightly. The stones beneath her feet vibrated harder as if the riverbed itself recognized her awakening. You are gifted with the strength of water, a spirit whispered, touching her forehead. A cool rush moved through her, and she felt the weight of the river obey her silent thoughts. You may summon the creatures who dwell with us, another murmured, placing a hand over her heart. She felt shapes brushing against her, a giant fish, serpentine shadows, glimmers of scales and fins that bowed to her presence. And you can unmask lies, the queen declared. No falsehood can stand before you. Truth will rise like bubbles breaking through depths. The girl trembled as the power settled into her bones, no longer wild but steady, like tides obeying the moon. But the queen's spirit lifted a warning finger. Use it wisely, child. Power without purpose invites destruction. The currents thickened, swirling with hidden danger. Your revenge must restore balance, the queen whispered, voice echoing like distant thunder. Not burn what remains of harmony. Their eyes, hundreds of ancient, knowing eyes, watched her. She nodded slowly, breath steady, strength returning in steady waves. I will not fail, she said. The spirits bowed, not deeply but enough to show respect. The riverbed around her dissolved again, the lights fading into soft currents. She felt herself rising, carried upward by invisible hands. The shimmering colors thinned, the water above parted, and a warm glow guided her back toward the waking world. As she broke the surface and opened her eyes on the riverbank once more, she knew one truth deep in her bones. She was no longer just a banished girl. She was the river's chosen. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, touching the river with a soft orange glow. Mist drifted across the water like thin white veils, and the air carried a cool stillness that made even the trees hold their breath. The river lay quiet, until the surface began to ripple, not from wind, not from fish, but from something rising from its depths. Slowly, gently, gracefully she emerged. Her head broke through the surface first, her hair streaming behind her like threads of midnight silk mixed with silver. The marks placed on her skin by the spirits glowed faintly, pulsing with the rhythm of water, as though the river itself had etched its secrets upon her. Her eyes were brighter, calmer, deeper than before, carrying reflections of worlds unseen. When she stepped onto the riverbank, droplets slid from her body but never touched the earth. They hovered, swirling playfully around her ankles like tiny guardians. She stood tall, not weak or frightened, but steady and unshaken. The girl who had been pushed into a canoe against her will was gone. In her place stood something stronger, something luminous, something the river had claimed, and returned. Not far downstream, an old fisherman sat by his canoe, preparing his nets for the morning. His hands froze mid-motion when he heard the soft sound of shifting water. He turned, and the sight before him made his breath catch in his throat. She stepped fully onto the bank and the river responded. A thin ribbon of water curled around her feet with each step, following wherever she moved. Dew on the grass lifted and drifted toward her, clinging to her like tiny sparkling jewels. The fisherman dropped to his knees. "River Mother," he whispered in trembling awe, "forgive me for staring." She blinked, startled. "No. I am no goddess," she said softly, her voice carrying an echo of currents beneath the surface. But the fisherman shook his head, trembling harder. "Only spirits return from that water. Only the blessed rise when the river has judged them. You came back at dawn, glowing, walking with water as your companion. You are no ordinary child." Before she could respond, he scrambled to his feet and ran toward the village, shouting words that would spark a fire no one could put out. "She has returned. She has returned from the river. Alive. Glowing like a spirit. The river brought her back." The commotion spread quickly. Women fetching water abandoned their pots and fled. Children peered from behind their mothers' wrappers with wide, fearful eyes. Men dropped their tools and murmured prayers under their breath. Within minutes, the whole village buzzed like a disturbed hive. But the loudest reaction came from one person, the stepmother. When she heard the fisherman's cries, her face drained of color. She froze in the middle of the compound, the calabash she was cleaning slipping from her hand and shattering on the ground. Her breath hitched and a tremor crawled up her spine. "No," she whispered. "No, it cannot be her. It cannot." But the murmurs grew louder. "She's back. She survived the spirits. She walks with the river." The stepmother's panic clawed deeper. She began pacing, wringing her hands so violently that her knuckles whitened. "It's not her," she insisted to the neighbors gathering around. "It's an evil spirit taking her form. Or the river playing tricks on us. The dead do not return." But even her voice shook with disbelief. The villagers parted slowly, their whispers softening into stunned silence as the girl approached. She walked with calm, steady grace, each step guided by an unseen rhythm. Water curled around her, following like a loyal companion. The glow on her skin was faint in the sunlight, but unmistakable. She did not rush. She did not hide. She simply moved forward, her eyes fixed on the village. The same village that had watched her be banished, the same village that now watched her return. And as she took another step, the water at her feet lifted like a gentle wave, gliding along with her, as though the river itself accompanied her on her journey back to the land that had wronged her. The morning sun had barely risen when she made her way toward the village square, her feet brushing over the damp grass that seemed to shimmer unnaturally beneath her steps. A hush fell over the villagers as they sensed something extraordinary in the air, a strange tension that made the birds pause mid-song and the wind hold its breath. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, the river's lingering magic still coursing through her veins, lending her an aura of otherworldly power. As she entered the square, heads turned and whispers spread like wildfire. Some villagers trembled, unsure whether what they were witnessing was a dream, a vision, or a reality shaped by the spirits themselves. She looked directly at the stepmother, whose face twisted into a mask of fury and fear. Every eye in the square was fixed on the two women, the silence thick and expectant. When she began to speak, her voice was unlike any they had ever heard. It carried a resonance that seemed to come from the depths of the river itself, echoing across the square and reverberating through the bones of those who listened. Each word rolled out with a weight that was impossible to ignore, trembling with the force of unseen currents and hidden truths. The stepmother opened her mouth to respond, but the words faltered, catching in her throat as if the air itself had conspired against her. The ground beneath them, damp from the river's magic, seemed to react to her presence, puddles forming with every step, small streams curling across the dirt, and a faint mist rising that gave her an ethereal glow. Children clutched their mothers' skirts, elders leaned on their staffs, and even the bravest of villagers stepped back, unnerved by the unnatural display of power. "You cannot hide what you have done," she said, her voice steady and commanding, yet layered with the strange harmonics of the river's song. The stepmother's eyes darted nervously around the square, trying to meet the gaze of anyone, searching for an ally, finding none. The villagers had grown used to her deceit, had whispered in shadows about her cruelty, but nothing had prepared them for this living proof, this voice that carried the weight of the river's judgment. The air shimmered around her, tiny ripples forming in puddles and twisting water in small eddies as if the river itself had followed her into the village. She raised her hands slightly, and visions began to shimmer in the air before the villagers' eyes. The stepmother's lies unfolded like a living tapestry, each thread of deceit illuminated. The secret charms she had planted in the house, the whispered curses meant to break the girl's spirit, the plots she had woven to isolate and harm her. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the truth became impossible to deny. Faces paled, mouths fell open, and hands flew to hearts in shock. Those who had once hesitated now found their courage, stepping forward to witness the justice that was unfolding. The stepmother's cheeks burned, her lips moving in frantic denial, but the visions only grew more vivid, more precise. The river spirits had no need for persuasion. They required no testimony other than the undeniable evidence they projected. Her plotting, her malicious intent, her manipulations, all were displayed in a cruel clarity that left no room for doubt. The villagers could see how she had whispered lies into their ears, how she had tried to twist hearts against the girl, how she had relied on fear and superstition to maintain her control. Some of the women cried out, covering their faces as memories of the stepmother's cruelty surfaced, while others whispered in awe at the power now standing before them. The men of the village, usually so quick to defend their own honor, shifted uncomfortably, realizing that authority alone could not hide the truth. The stepmother's bravado crumbled like clay under the relentless flow of the river's revelation. She tried to speak, tried to summon a defense, but her voice was drowned in the resonance of the girl's power, a sound that seemed to shake the very air and awaken something primal in those who listened. The villagers, once uncertain and timid, now turned as one against her, their fear replaced with a determination to no longer be complicit in the stepmother's schemes. They whispered, then shouted, then cried in unison, their voices carrying both condemnation and relief. The girl stood firm, her eyes glimmering with the reflection of the water spirit's light. She did not need to raise her voice further. The truth itself carried the weight of judgment. The stepmother, once feared and untouchable, now stood exposed, her lies laid bare for all to see, powerless beneath the force of justice she could neither understand nor resist. The square, once a place of mundane life, had transformed into a stage of reckoning, the earth wet beneath their feet, the air thick with awe, fear, and revelation, and the villagers knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The forest glimmered with an unnatural light as the river girl stepped forward, her presence commanding and serene, yet charged with the immense power of the spirits that had chosen her as their vessel. The air thickened, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint electric tang of water magic, and the ground beneath the stepmother trembled subtly, warning of the force that was about to descend. Without a sound, the river began to rise, its waters swirling unnaturally fast, climbing higher and higher until it formed a barrier that encircled the stepmother completely. She stumbled back, her eyes wide with terror, shrieking as the cold, shimmering walls of water seemed to close in around her. The villagers, who had followed the chase at a safe distance, gasped in awe, unable to comprehend the scale of the river's sudden, impossible ascent. The water glimmered like liquid silver, reflecting the morning sun in dazzling patterns, and small waves licked the edges of the earth, threatening to spill over if not controlled. The girl paused, feeling the weight of her power and the responsibility that came with it pressing down upon her. In the silence that fell over the forest and village, she battled internally, her heart torn between mercy and the desire for vengeance. Memories of her suffering, the years of cruelty and manipulation inflicted by the stepmother, surged through her mind like relentless currents. Every harsh word, every cruel act, every moment of despair came rushing back with vivid clarity. And yet, alongside that anger, a strange calmness began to settle in her chest, a gentle whisper from the spirits that guided her. They reminded her that true justice was not about destruction, that the balance of the world required more than punishment, that cruelty must be met with truth, not mere violence. The spirit's message resonated deep within her: justice is balance. The words echoed in her mind as if carried by the wind itself, and she felt the river respond to her thoughts, its swirling waters moving in tune with her heartbeat. The stepmother's shrieks intensified as she saw the girl hesitate, and she began to plead, tears streaming down her face, trying to bargain with the one person who had been powerless for so long. "Please, don't," she cried. "I am sorry. I didn't mean," but her voice was drowned by the river's own rising roar, the waters vibrating with a resonance that seemed to shake the very air. The girl's eyes, calm yet piercing, met the stepmother's, and in that gaze, the woman felt the full weight of accountability, the undeniable recognition of every cruel act she had committed. With a deep breath, the girl lifted her hand, feeling the water bend to her will. Currents twisted and coiled, forming shapes that mirrored the river spirits themselves, flowing and weaving around her fingers, a symphony of movement and force. The stepmother fell to her knees as the river paused, waiting, a living entity reflecting the girl's choice. There was no need for a blade, no need for vengeance to spill blood. The girl focused her intent, channeling the power of the river through her body and mind, and commanded the waters to act. The river responded instantly, not with destruction but with revelation. Waves surged and enveloped the stepmother, lifting her gently but firmly from the ground. Streams of water coiled around her, not to harm her physically, but to strip away every falsehood, every manipulation, every ounce of deceit that she had clung to for so many years. The stepmother cried out, not from pain but from the exposure of truth. The river peeled away her charm, the dark whisperings she had used to control others, the lies she had told to weave fear, all unraveling in a visible, almost tangible torrent. Her posture crumpled under the weight of the truth, shoulders sagging as shame washed over her in waves stronger than any river. The villagers watched in stunned silence, some frozen, some whispering prayers as the once feared woman was laid bare, powerless in every sense. She could no longer manipulate, no longer intimidate, no longer hide behind the shadowy web she had spun. Her eyes, once sharp and cunning, now darted desperately, seeing nothing but the girl and the water that held her accountable. The river slowly receded, leaving the stepmother collapsed on the damp earth, shivering, humiliated, and utterly powerless. Her hair clung to her face, her robes soaked and clinging, a reflection of the inner truth that had been ripped from her. The girl stood tall, serene, her presence glowing faintly with the residual magic of the spirits, a figure of justice and mercy intertwined. Around her, the villagers felt a deep sense of awe and reverence, knowing that they had witnessed not only the downfall of a tyrant but the true power of balance. The stepmother looked up briefly, eyes filled with a mix of fear and understanding, realizing that her fate was not destruction, but the inescapable truth laid bare for all to see, a judgment that required no vengeance, only clarity. In that moment, the river girl understood fully what the spirits had meant. Justice had been served not through violence, but through the stripping away of lies and power, leaving only truth and accountability. The stepmother's shame was her punishment, her exposure the reckoning, and the balance restored. The villagers, witnessing this display, felt a newfound respect and awe for the girl who had endured, who had risen from suffering, and who now stood as a living embodiment of the river's wisdom, a reminder that true power lies not in cruelty or fear, but in the unwavering courage to confront truth. The villagers slowly emerged from their places of caution, moving closer to the river girl as if drawn by an invisible current of awe and respect. Their eyes, once filled with doubt and fear, now glimmered with recognition of her courage and the purity that had carried her through unimaginable suffering. Mothers held their children closer, whispering of the power they had witnessed, while the elders, faces lined with years of wisdom and guilt, stepped forward with heavy hearts. They bowed low before her, their voices trembling with sincerity, acknowledging the wrongs that had been allowed to fester under their watch and offering apologies that carried the weight of generations. The villagers' murmurs turned to quiet declarations of respect, a shared understanding that the girl who had returned from the river was no ordinary human but a protector, a living testament to endurance and moral strength. The elders, in a gesture that carried both humility and reverence, extended an invitation for her to take a permanent place among the village guardians. It was not merely an honor but a recognition of her role in restoring justice and balance, of her courage in facing both human malice and the river's demanding spirits. They spoke of her wisdom, of the clarity of judgment she had shown, and of the guidance she could provide for future generations. The villagers, inspired by the unfolding reconciliation, began to gather in small groups, offering gestures of support, gifts of food and quiet words of praise. Even those who had once doubted her abilities found themselves compelled to acknowledge the depth of her strength, and a sense of unity and renewed respect spread through the community like the gentle ripple of a stream returning to calm waters. The stepmother, humbled and broken, was not destroyed but exiled. She was sent far from the river she had disrespected, forced to live in the distant hills beyond the village, stripped of her power, her influence and her ability to harm others. The villagers ensured that she would have sustenance and shelter but warned her that the river's justice would follow any attempt to return and spread deceit once more. Her face was pale, her eyes downcast, and she carried with her the burden of recognition for every act of cruelty she had committed. Exile became her lesson, and the knowledge that she had been spared death weighed upon her as heavily as any punishment could, leaving her to reflect upon her choices in solitude and shame. As the stepmother disappeared into the horizon, the river itself seemed to exhale, the waters calming and stilling as though the spirits who had guided the girl were satisfied with the outcome. The violent currents and shimmering walls of water that had marked the confrontation receded into gentle ripples, sparkling in the sunlight like scattered jewels. The air, once thick with tension, now carried a serene hush, a quiet that spoke of balance restored and of the natural order acknowledged. The villagers, observing the transformation, felt relief and gratitude, their spirits lifted by the presence of a protector who had confronted darkness with courage rather than vengeance. The river girl stood at the edge of the water, letting the light touch her face as she watched the gentle current carry leaves and petals downstream. She felt the lingering power of the spirits within her, a reminder that justice had been fulfilled, that cruelty had been exposed, and that balance had returned to the land. The village, once shadowed by fear and deceit, now basked in a newfound clarity, aware that strength, purity and courage could restore even the deepest wounds, and that the river's guidance was ever present for those who respected its flow. The spiritual storm had ended, leaving behind not destruction, but renewal, forgiveness, and the quiet assurance that truth, once revealed, would always endure.